Welcome to Afterthoughts, a space where we discuss, we apply, and we ground some of the concepts from the Preach into real life. So today we are joined by Rebecca, Elsie, and Ben. Welcome, guys, and thanks for joining.
Hello.
Now, we're currently tackling part 2 of our Joy in Sorrow series that Robin's been taking us through. In the Preach this week, we took a look at the life of Job and the idea that suffering and sorrow can help us realize that true satisfaction is not found in the gifts of God, but in our relationship with God himself. To turn to the panelists, I guess one to kick off with the idea of blessings, right? We often have, in the Preach, they brought up the false assumptions that we often hold around blessings in our life, around the reciprocal nature, or if we're good, God will bless us. Now, surely God does bless our best efforts to serve him. Is this true? Are blessings the opposite of suffering, or can God bless us in suffering? And how does that challenge kind of how we see blessings and what they are?
So my thoughts is sometimes we don't see the blessing during the suffering. We don't see it until we've come through it. And I think that blessing is what we see in Romans chapter 5, where Paul talks about not only do we glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope. And I think that is the blessing we get out of suffering, that our characters get developed. We learn perseverance and we learn hope.
God's goodness is there, and it might not always be in the form that we want it, but I think it's still important to recognize blessing. And when I think about that, I was reminded in Matthew 5 of blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And that's a funny kind of blessing that we might not always appreciate. We might not want the blessing of comfort because it means there is grief, but I think it's quite a profound idea. And if we think about our relationship with God, and that the Holy Spirit is the best comforter and a close friend, we can experience the blessing of having that friendship through even the hardest of situations.
Yeah, it's a big question. Hey, I think especially trying to draw that correlation between blessings and suffering, and even the vice versa of, am I suffering because is God not blessing me, or am I not being obedient to God, or is that as a result of sin? I think they're big questions. During a period of suffering, how does this change our understanding of being blessed by God? I think God calls us to obey him as his children, and he loves it when his children are obedient to him. But I also think potentially that could be where we get it wrong, and it could be our human nature of interpreting that and assuming that obedience leads to blessings, which isn't always the case, right?
In the Preach, they mentioned first world privilege, and Matt Chandler, who kind of questioned whether his faith in God and the blessings of Christian life, he attributed with the fact that he has all these blessings of the first world, right? The persecuted church, we know, have such an intense faith and reliance on God because they need it. There is no alternative. Whereas here in the first world, we can sit back a bit and just be, say your grace, rock up to church kind of Christians. Does the comforts of our wonderful life here in Australia sometimes distract from Christianity?
Potentially, yes. I think our first world comforts and comfortability is sometimes a stumbling block. It is sometimes a hurdle, and it is sometimes hard to see through or see past, I guess. And that's going to be different for everyone though, right? Everyone's living in different situations and different circumstances. And in regards to suffering, maybe it could be a stumbling block. Maybe it could be like a bit of a hard way to see past that first world environment. But I don't think it stops us or inhibits us from intimacy with God, or from knowing more about God. If anything, we have a huge amount of resources available to us for us to be able to encounter God. And I think that's if we can use that to our benefit as well.
Yeah, no, I love the nuance there, right? It's not like, we're going to romanticize Christian persecution in the third world. It's that, we've been given tools and they can be misused, or we can use them for God's glory.
I think perhaps because of the comfort of the Western world and the relative ease of my life, I can often be tricked into thinking I have more control over my life than I do. And that can make it hard for me to trust God and really place my trust in Him when I am placing my trust in myself, or like the stability I perceive in my life. So perhaps, you know, in situations of real desperation, I can imagine like my only choice would be to trust God, really, and that might help me to grow in that. But at the same time, like even in the first world, I'm yet to meet a person who's never experienced pain, who's never experienced some form of suffering. And so I think we all still will have opportunities in our life to learn that we're not in control and that we need to put our trust in God and to fall back and rely on Him.
Yeah, like it's not that we live in a world, yes, our current society kind of has an aversion to suffering, but we all still experience it, right? And there's still plenty of opportunity for God to move.
Having comfort means you still can have intimacy with God, but there is something about walking through dark times and trials and just really pleading to God for His comfort and for His deliverance. And I think it can create a depth there that perhaps we don't necessarily experience when everything's going well. We still experience suffering here. You know, we have friends who die of terrible diseases or from accidents, or people with health challenges, or, you know, terrible things happen still. There's no protection against that. We're not immune from it.
Beck, I love what you said there in terms about like it is not biblically or historically like supported the fact that God will shield us from suffering necessarily. So then why are we here? And then, which leads us to the next question of, well, if it's not the gifts, it's not protection, it's not that, it's our greatest treasure is God Himself and our relationship with Him. And the story of Job is the story of a man who's everything stripped away, and he never gets the answer of why, but he does get a relationship, a new revelation of God and who He is. So I know this is something I personally really struggle with, right? My prayer life, my time spent in worship, my time spent with God almost directly correlates with the hard times in my life, right? If I've got struggles, then God, I'm coming straight to you. But if things are good, maybe I'm fine. So I want to ask you guys, how do we, and I guess getting a bit more personal here, like go for God as our greatest treasure, not necessarily our lifeline in times of suffering, but like a really good thing in times of suffering and times of comfort?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I definitely agree with you in terms of I find it easier to draw near to God and go to Him when things aren't going as I'd like them to. But I think in the good times, or in the easy times, or the times when we enjoy plenty and peace, I guess cultivating a heart of gratitude is a way that we can keep pursuing God and expressing our thanks, and just recognition that every good gift we have is from Him. It's not what we deserve or earned. But yeah, I think a heart of gratitude, giving thanks, is great, and just pressing into different kind of patterns or rhythms in your life that help you personally to draw near to God. I know that I love being in nature. Like that's a time when I experience peace and kind of ability to sift through my thoughts, sift a bit through my heart maybe, and chat to God. So that's helpful for me.
And Elsie?
I was just thinking just then, you know, if we pray to God, you know, help me not be scared of suffering, or, you know, get me out of my comfort zone so that I can rely on you more and more. That's a bit of a scary prayer to pray, because you're essentially inviting difficult times ahead. And I think that's a little bit of what the pandemic is doing to us now. It's stripping away from us things that we may find comforting in the freedoms that we're used to. And it's a good testing time now to see whether we're actually drawing near to God in times like this, or are we mindlessly scrolling through the internet, or are we endlessly stuffing our faces, or are we just like lying on the couch doing nothing? It's such a great time to draw near to God in word and in prayer and worship. Are we doing that? Yes, those are my jumbled thoughts pinging off one another, which may not have answered the original question.
And that was great, Elsie, because the fact that, like, you're right, the pandemic, we're in lockdown now, and we still have so many good things, but a lot of the stuff we depend on and enjoy has been stripped away. So it's like, well, we're here for God and a relationship with God. And, like, it's, I guess, taking our focus off the gifts and on his goodness.
For me personally, it's important for me to remember that by nature, I'm sinful, right? And so by nature, I have to deny myself every day. I need to deny my flesh, deny my kind of earthly desires, and seek first his kingdom. That's kind of probably where I start. What that looks like is really hard. So I guess pursuing Jesus and keeping him and seeking first his kingdom in both suffering and in blessings. Like you kind of alluded to, it's easier, I guess, to do it in suffering because it's like, oh God, like, where are you? But during times of joy and blessings, you're like, yeah, sweet, I got this. So I think keeping in good habits is important for me. So reading my Bible, spending time with God every day, irrespective of what month of the year we're in, what season we're in, if it's blessings or if it's suffering, spending time with God every day, and trying to be content in all circumstances. Not easy things at all, but I think that's I think it's a part of a wrestle. I think we have to wrestle with that, and I don't think that's a bad thing either. I think wrestling with that is okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I love that. Like, in terms of if you're struggling with something, like, that's a good thing, right? Like, when we're stripped away from, I guess, the God's gifts, or when we're in suffering, we don't need to be just 100% okay all the time. But the fact that we want to satisfy ourselves in God that's what it's about. And I love that idea of discipline, right? Like, because that's what, it doesn't change. Like Paul says, I can be content with a lot, or I can be content with a little, because he's found his true joy in God.
I think suffering's hard, right? And suffering, talking about it from a Christian perspective even, is really hard. It's not easy. And so I don't think, personally, I don't want to come across as like having answers and like, yeah, I know what this is about and I know why this is happening and you should be doing this in this situation. It's like, actually, no, like, I don't think we're necessarily called to have all the answers. So I just want to emphasize how hard it is, I guess, and that it's not easy, and I think that's okay.
And hey guys, thanks so much. Like, I guess, like, aside from the questions and all that, like, it was fun to see you all and just discuss this stuff, because Beck, like you said, I'm interested in everyone's thoughts. It's tough stuff that we all face and no one has the answers. So it's just great to hear different perspectives. Thanks for joining us today. This has been Afterthoughts. Special thank you to Ben, Beck, and Elsie for joining us. And if you missed the preach, please check it out on our YouTube or podcast channels. And we'll see you guys next week.